We want to wish you a happy Black History Month, as Black History Month is February, and at Beinecke and across Yale, it's also January and March and the other 9 months. We will invoke in this presentation other words of our great muse and inspiration, Elizabeth Alexander, extraordinary Yale alumna, who wrote in words that we have at the beginning of Shining Light on Truth, New Haven, Yale, and Slavery, and I quote, "Black history stands at the center of American history. This country cannot begin to be understood without it." So what we will do today, as we do in this exhibition and all the related work, is the important work of understanding American history. Each of the three of us will offer some reflections, and we're excited to hear comments and chat from you and questions. Ask that you put questions in the Q&A. Some top-line stats. Since Shining Light on Truth, New Haven, Yale, and Slavery opened at the New Haven Museum, we have had more than 11,000 people come through. A shout out to our colleagues and collaborators at the New Haven Museum who have been our partners throughout this work and our hosts for this exhibition, which remains on view until March 1st at 114 Whitney Avenue. 6,000 people plus have come through as general admission visitors. We've had a very active program of tours, often that Chaz or David John and I have done, with more than 1,300 people coming in group tours. And probably we are most excited, and a big shout out to our colleague Joanna Steinberg and all the team at the New Haven Museum, that there have been more than 1,200 K-12 students, particularly middle and high school students, who've come through and organized school student group visits with more than 130 chaperones, teachers, and other adult chaperones. And there have been another 300 K-12 educators from across Connecticut who've participated in professional development programs. Again, by way of invocation, Elizabeth Alexander, whose words begin and end the exhibition. And Elizabeth, who reminds us, history is not a triumphal march to the finish line. History is made up of struggle, contradiction, and resistance. History is not punctuated with a period, but rather with continuing ellipses, ... And as we approach the semi-quincentennial of the United States on July 4th, 2026, as we begin this work of America 250, it's important to remember our history, America's history, is not a triumphal march to the finish line. It is made up of struggle, contradiction, resistance, and most importantly, it is ongoing, ... We always like to acknowledge by reference all of the many people in this work, and each of us will mention some names, but don't take those to be the only names. On the left, you see a slide that is the image in the museum itself of the acknowledgements. You can't read those names, the type's too small because there's so many names. We encourage you to go to the museum and read the names. There are dozens and dozens and scores. And we want to thank all of the people who've been part of this. No book is ever done by one person. No exhibition's ever done just by 3 people. This has been collective work about collective history. And of course, it's also corrective history, because it's not as if Yale has not done its history before. These are just some of the many books of Yale history over Yale's first 3 centuries. But the issue is that the history has not been full and has not been complete. That's really the work we've been doing in this Yale and Slavery Research Project, summoned by President Peter Salovey, chaired by David Blight, and involving so many across campus and in the New Haven community. This slide gives a line from Benjamin Silliman that describes how we at Yale often were, which was to know things but not really acknowledge and say them. And that was true about the history of Yale, New Haven, and slavery. This headline is from the Yale Daily News in 2001. Not 3 years ago, not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, but more than 24 years ago now, asking, when will Yale face up to its shameful past in support of slavery? This was at a time when 3 graduate students did path-breaking work in a report that called Yale out during its tercentennial to do honest and full history. This is the front page of the New Haven Register on August 14th, 2001. And this is the front page of the New York Times Connecticut section on that same day, a time when the Times used to have 1.5 million subscribers in print. This was a call to Yale to do the right thing and to do full history. Unfortunately, the institution in 2001 did not rise to the occasion and live up to our motto of Lux et Veritas, light and truth. Instead, the institution derided the authors of the report, the 3 graduate students, and ignored its findings. Yale called a conference together, and so there was a conference actually that happened in 2002 at the law school, sponsored by the president's office and the Gilder Lehrman Center and others on campus, that was on the topic nominally of Yale, New Haven, and American slavery in 2002. But that conference did not actually honestly and rigorously look at the history of Yale, New Haven, and slavery. And as one of the participants, Owen Williams, who would go on to be president of the University of the South, a Yale PhD in history, said, Yale obfuscated at the time. The real work of doing honest history of institutional engagement with slavery began with Ruth Simmons. And we need to always honor and acknowledge Dr. Simmons as the pioneer and the leader in this work. She became president of Brown in 2004, first Black woman to be president of an Ivy League school, summoned her institution to do the work. They published a book in 2006. It was followed by many others, including Princeton, including Harvard, scores and dozens of others followed, with Yale finally joining in the work that was published last year and the work that this exhibition is part of. We should be proud of what we're doing, but we need to have humility that we are following the footsteps of pioneers like Dr. Ruth Simmons, and that in many ways we're late, which gives us an even greater obligation to do the work we're doing, to do it fully, and to keep it going. It is work that is supported at all levels of the institution, and we want to give a shout out to President Salovey, as well as to President McInnes, who was a trustee before she became president, and as someone who has worked in this field herself, was one of the people who led the effort at the University of Virginia, and her own scholarship has been amongst that has inspired our scholarship in this work in New Haven and at Yale. So just to turn quickly and then turn it over to David Jon Walker and Charles Warner Jr., this show, Shining Light on Truth, which accompanies the book Yale and Slavery History, an audio walking tour, a website. It is a show where we read the future by the past, and we have tried to exemplify and embody this history of our community, a history that is held both in the formal archives of places like Beinecke and in the equally legitimate archive that is community memory. I want to shout out all of the people who worked on this, but as these slides go by, I want to call out Jennifer Coggins and Hope McGrath and Tobias Cropper, Beinecke Library colleagues who have been essential in this work. I also want to note, and you'll hear more about this over time, that coming soon to campus is another iteration, Shining Light on Truth, Black Lives at Yale and in New Haven, that will be on view at the Yale Schwarzman Center beginning on March 24th through the rest of the calendar year. More to come about this. The work is ongoing, and this is just one image that will be featured in that show, which will both center and celebrate early Black students and also very much early Black staff, many of whom were key leaders in the New Haven community. In turning it back to David Jon Walker and Charles Warner, again, we have had great impact, but these are beginning days. So this is a set of numbers to get us inspired. It's great that 11,000 people have been through the New Haven Museum. Lots of people have come to the museum who've never come before. And we frankly have been able to expose this work to many people because it's been at the New Haven Museum that wouldn't have seen it if it had only been on campus. We're again very excited by the number of young people and educators at both the K-12 level as well as at the collegiate level that have been through, because those are so many acorns that will grow into oaks of knowledge and wisdom. And I will conclude as I transition to David Jon Walker and Charles Warner with just a few quotes and some images so that you can be present in the space. This is from a visitor who noted that it was transformational for them to sit in the room with the portraits of early Black students and feel the presence of those incredible folks. This line, humbled to see what was and grieve what could have been, expresses sentiments we've heard from many, many of the visitors through this show. A longstanding colleague at Yale wrote in the visitor book that this is one of the best exhibitions and part of the one of the most important lines of historical research they have seen in all of their decades at Yale. Someone wrote, quote, "This is a moving experience. I am moved beyond words, holding back tears. Also excited to hear stories untold about the Black Yale grads. This is beautiful." You see on the left, Brandon Mason, and a happy birthday to Brandon and his wife, Regina Mason, one of the key memory keepers of this story and one of our key collaborators over time, in time, and for the future. And on the right, you see a number of New Haven public school teachers gathered listening to Charles E. Warner. And this final slide, in quote, as I turn it over to DJW and to Chaz, shows a number of Yale College students and their student mentees in the New Haven Public Schools, the Yale Black Men's Union. And the quote, I think, sums up the impact of this show as a powerful reminder of our shared history, the value of truth-telling, and the ongoing relevance of our legacies of slavery, racism, and resistance. So let me turn it over to my two colleagues, and in doing so, by way of introduction, I was asked to lead this work of the exhibition in June of 2023. I immediately thought of two people to join as leaders and be co-leaders in this: Jon Walker, a graduate of the Yale School of Art and its graphic design program, and Charles E. Warner Jr., a leader in the New Haven Public Schools, a lifelong New Havener, chair of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. This has shown what three people can do when we activate networks of memory and colleagues across campus and across the community. And I have to give my deep love and admiration and respect to Jon Warner and Charles E. Warner Jr. Gentlemen, the screen is yours.
All right, thank you, Michael. And thank you, Chaz, and for all of you all participating today. So my reflections on Shining Light on Truth. So we're barreling towards the 1-year anniversary of its opening in February of 2024. Where to start is such an enjoyable array of breadcrumbs to cobble together in order to share cohesive thoughts on the concept of this show, the immediacy of its broad messages, and the affect on communities near and far. So how did I come to do this work? The quick story, which Michael shared a bit about, is that Michael, had seen the curation of an exhibition design of a School of Art show that I had produced in the spring of 2023 and asked if I'd be potentially interested in designing a museum show focused on Yale and New Haven history, tied to the release of this book by David Beinecke and the Yale and Slavery Committee. So he sent me a draft manuscript and said, it's worth the read, but the museum show will be a tangential connection to what's in the book, more focused on New Haven and the Black community. Little did I know just how much I would have to learn in a short amount of time. I needed to wrap my mind around the who and the what before actually committing to this project. So Michael, Chaz, and I met over the content list with the exhibition script and contents as far as artifacts. So local newspapers and policies, native churches that were the bedrock of communities for progress, protest, and education, monuments, stories of individuals whose impacts have far outlived their names and the burials of their existences. Sadly, not making it into local, much less regional curriculum of community memory. The magnitude of that content sang in ways that felt all too familiar. So I am a native Tennessean, Nashville specifically, relatively new to the Northeast, but I grew up on the campus of an HBCU, Tennessee State University, which is really close to Fisk and Meharry. But in the shadows of a father as a professor and a preacher and a health administrator for a mother, and the social circles of determined and focused Black Americans that were carrying the flames of progress lit by their parents in their communities. One of the men that I remember growing up was a man by the name of Matthew Kennedy, who was a child prodigy whose mom left the South and enrolled him in music classes. And so he, as she tells the story, she went to a segregated theater and saw Rachmaninoff playing and said, I think my son could do this, because he was playing piano at the time. And so he ended up enrolling and graduating as a classically trained pianist from Juilliard in 1940. And as a 1947 subsequent graduate of Fisk, he became a professor there, but was also a longtime director of the Jubilee Singers. And this is a person that I was raised around he wasn't a contemporary of my father's, but he was more of a mentor in other people. And so he was always challenging and encouraging amongst many, many others that came to mind as I embarked on this project with my brilliant colleagues. So there are many people to thank, and the community is large as far as folks that collaborated on this exhibition. So Benjamin Blunt, a letterpress printer out of Indiana, was referred by Rick Griffith, a designer and printer in Colorado, to print the names of the enslaved, which are featured in the exhibition. Shelby Rodifer, a letterer and sign painter in Louisville, Kentucky, graciously agreed to craft a banner for the 1831 college to serve as ephemera for our, I don't know, our rendition of this school, and think about artifacts of the time. Jamie Crone of the Guggenheim in New York referred us to Dugal for production to print the banners that you see hanging around the rotunda, sharing the narrative of this really, really rich, harrowing tale. Eleanor Holland, a calligrapher, hand wrote and titled Names of the Enslaved on the letterpress piece by Ben Blunt. And then Desmond Lewis referred Robert Rising III of New York, who's a Black lumberjack, who provided this wooden piece of white oak to adorn with the names of, well, not the names, but the ads of ads for people that were emancipating themselves from slavery. Moving on, the initial opening and subsequent tours of this exhibition were awe-inspiring. To live with this content for over a year, one would believe speaking about this deeply troubling and impactful and triumphant history would get old. But to date, it's only deepened my relationship with the history and the community's renewed relation to the town and the institution for questions and offerings for reparative action. Family and personal friends from the South came up to view the show and were absolutely shocked to learn about the great and loudly spoken fallacy in the educational curriculum there, that the formal North did not participate in slavery, but only fought to end it. They read the binders featuring the 220 attendees and graduates, learning about the numerous people that left Yale and led their communities to further promote growth in education. I learned about, many other stories, but just thinking about personal history, my grandmother, Claudia Davis, was a 1945 graduate of the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and would have encountered a person on the wall by the name of John McLean Ross, who was a Yale College class of 1916 graduate. That was the first head of speech and drama at her institution. So these stories really may seem new to many, but are so far from the shallow graves of the archives from which they have been hidden. And I just, thank you, Michael, for the opportunity, and Chaz for the opportunity to collaborate with you all on, such groundbreaking and jaw-dropping knowledge that otherwise would continue to stay in the archives. All right, Chaz.
Thank you. Your remarks, DJ, really speak to the importance of this project overall in general, but then also it underscores, your comments underscore why this project is important to me personally. I am, as Michael said, a lifelong New Havener, but I always had the benefit of a strong network, um, primarily starting from home, but also my parents' friends and people from the community who helped to raise me here. Many of these folks were Black people who had the opportunity um, to have access to higher education. And much of that education was done initially through historically Black colleges and universities, and then for graduate school, going on to Ivy Leagues and larger, predominantly white institutions. But there was always a fond connection and hearkening back to the rich culture of that historically Black college and university tradition. And out of sort of being exposed to that rich tradition lifelong, I came to understand the importance of many of those schools that were related to the American Missionary Association. And the American Missionary Association was a religious sort of mission undertaking related primarily to the Congregational Church. And if anyone knows anything about the history of Yale, certainly the creation of Yale was solely sort of the child of the Congregational Church. And so, what I was taught and what I understood very early on was that institutions like Yale were directly linked to the establishment of historically Black colleges and universities, many of them, including Howard University and Hampton University and Atlanta University and Fisk University, where my mother attended school. And so I always felt a connection to Yale, and that this sort of tradition of Black excellence and this rich culture of historically Black education had ties to the institution that anchored the city that I grew up in. And so it's with that sort of understanding of ties and relationships and networks that made me interested in getting to know who I was and who my family was. And in doing so, of course, it exposes you to other relations and other institutions. And before you, when you kind of look at it, you have this web. And I would say that I had the opportunity in a research fellowship at the Beinecke in the community engagement department to really explore those webs and networks. And so this was really sort of an interesting place where my life, where who I was, my family history, my family's culture um, comes to the forefront and is centered in a really major undertaking. So I must say that when I think of Shining Light on Truth exhibit, when I think about all of the work that we've done and will be, continuing to do, I think pride, I think wonder, and I think journey. Pride, really just because I personally feel like I not only showed up for the project, but I feel like the work that we were doing was more than purely academic and scholastic. This was life changing for people. This exhibit gave face and voice to people who had long been forgotten and relegated to the basement of archives or had their existence sort of written out because at the time they weren't important enough to fully record and delve into. And I felt like this exhibit, this project, this work brings them back to the forefront and allows people to hear and to see who they are. And so it was certainly spiritual in that regard. The wonder comes from I don't know a final destination for this work that we're doing. I wonder who's touched and how. We have comments, and I've heard people say things. I've seen people come to the exhibit and cheer. I've seen people come to the exhibit and silently sit in contemplation. I've seen people weep. I've seen people say, why didn't we know this? And so there have been a mix of impressions and impacts, and I wonder fully where this goes. And again, you know, the beautiful thing about learning is it's regenerative and it's restoring and it rejuvenates. And I wonder sort of what fruits will come of this effort. And then journey. If you think about all the hands that have gone into this work, I feel like I represent the community outside of the university. It was my privilege and pleasure to bring um, history and stories of people in the community, things that have been shared and told to me in my own sort of community history work. Um, I felt like that's what I brought to the table. And then Michael from the university side representing scholarship and the long history of work being done through Beinecke with sharing their archives and the information they have with the community. And then DJ as a student representing, you know, the learning, the people who will be driving this work well into the future. And all three of those components were necessary to bring us to this point. We all come from different places, but the work that we've been doing together allowed us to sort of bring those three different starting places into one direction. And I am excited. I am changed by the journey. And I feel like if we hit these targets, then we have done our job. And so for me, one of those targets was making sure that young people in this community, young people in New Haven, had the opportunity to really get to know a full story. If you listen to people talk about Yale, they have all kinds of misconceptions, ideas, myths, rumors about historical things. And I feel like this project helped to really dispel some of that and bring to light some very important truths. That Black people from this community were key, were instrumental in the development of the university, and not just as workers and supporters, but as students who took the knowledge, the education they received from Yale and fanned out across this globe and made changes wherever they were. And we still benefit from a lot of those changes that these early Yale students helped to enact. Two, it was important that Yale students, current Yale students, understood the true story of Black involvement at the university. It was important to me that people understood, you know, in a time where folks are accused of sort of being dropped into certain spaces. It was important that people understood that there was a long history of hard work, excellent scholarship, and um, top-notch service that should be highlighted, and that this is not some new phenomenon. There's been a Black presence at the university from its first building on campus. And then the other thing I wanted to do, tip my hat to people who had walked through the gates at Yale from the first Black student there in the 1830s until today. I wanted the graduates to know that all that they had been through, of course, their hard work in the classroom, but whatever other experiences that they experienced in their time at the university, it was not in vain, and that all of their individual achievements are important and add to a larger historical picture. And so, if young people from this community can be inspired and see themselves, if current Yale students have a better understanding of what their school community and what their school history is really like, and if people who walk through those gates can see themselves and look back at this project feeling seen, heard, and connected, then I have done my job. And so the next leg of this is, what next? Where do we go? Why does this matter? And what part does the public play in all of this? Well, I feel like if you've been to this exhibit, then you've seen that DJW lets you know at the very beginning that you are not just sort of a passive viewer to this history. You have a duty. You're a participant. You seeing, you hearing, you reading, you understanding better. It's your job then to take what you have seen, heard, and what you now understand, and go share it with someone, and educate someone, and enlighten someone, and tell the story. And so, Michael, of course, thank you. This has been another layer in the gift that keeps on giving. I joined this project really in 2020, in the fall of 2020, along with Michael, when David Blight asked me if I was interested in taking a journey, and I said yes. And from that beginning of that journey to this journey, I must say I know that I am walking in my purpose. And Michael and DJW, I am more than happy to join you two gents on any other expedition of learning and truth telling. This has been transformative, not only for me, but I know for the greater public. And I thank you, and I thank all of you who have come and seen the exhibit, who take an interest, who have been coming to the Mondays at Beinecke's and coming to the different talks. I have to shout out my partner, my partners with an S in the work. I would say my main partner, Jennifer Coggins, who hopped in with me and really gave us sort of a roadmap. Tobias Cropper for his great wisdom and talent and ability. Hope, who is an excellent researcher who finds pieces of stories that I always want to know more about. She never lets me down by coming and giving me more. I'd like to mention Jen Castellan, who handles the business, but you know, none of this can happen if the business is not handled. There are a few folks in the community, Sharon Esdale and Judge Clifton Graves, who are always a good source of reflection and sort of focus for me. And I would like to shout out my parents, Dr. Charles Warner Sr. and Dr. Regina Warner, who taught me to be interested in the people that are around me, who taught me to value history, and who taught me to value social networks, because without that teaching, I wouldn't be able to contribute what I've contributed. Thank you.